Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent podcast. This week, Melissa Bennett-Heinz is back. Melissa is a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in New York, Washington, Texas, and North Carolina. And she has over 20 years of specialized training and experience in the treatment of PTSD, sexual trauma, child abuse, chronic mental illness, and mood and anxiety disorders. Melissa primarily works with adults in both individual and group settings with people who are highly educated and successful, C-suite executives who appear to have it together and are happy, but are stuck in old relational patterns, struggle with perfectionism, relationships, and codependency. Melissa, it's great to have you back.
It's great to be back. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Thank you. All right, so we'll do the typical two, but since you've already been here, I want to read your definition of codependency from our interview. You emphasized how it's a relationship dynamic that occurs where the giver completely sacrifices their own needs for the sake and well-being of another. And you also talked about how codependency is how you feel in a relationship, right? The giver is anxious, insecure, questioning, overdoing, etc. Anything you want to expand on, Melissa, and how you conceptualize codependency?
Yeah, it's a conceptualization, right? It's a theory. So, I feel so bad for this word that we use to describe, because it's gotten such a bad rap. I recognize that every relationship has codependency components in it, and that's how relationships all work, right? Whether it's a relationship you have with another person, could be a friend, could be a partnership, it could be a relationship you have with your kids. It can also be a relationship you have with an entity, such as a company,
right,
or a group, a church. And when I talk about it, it's really an attempt to explain, using this word codependency, is an attempt to explain a dynamic of a relationship that can become unhealthy. So is codependency always bad? Maybe not, right? If all relationships contain codependency to some extent, they're not all bad, right? So I think how I'm thinking about it, at least right now, is more expansive in terms of thinking of it as healthy codependency versus unhealthy codependency. And is there a way to be dependent in a system while not completely, right? That would be very codependent, but maybe not completely sacrificing your own needs all the time. But is there a way that there can be a balance in the codependency that we have?
Right.
And when it's problematic, it's very unhealthy, can even be absolutely destructive. And in most severe cases, death, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate this. And yeah, I think with all of our like psychobabble, which is that's what I tell my patients, because there's like a term for everything.
Yep.
Some of my patients recently, one's facing a loss of a family member, and her family member's sick, it's going to happen, so she's in this weird space, and I was like, oh, we call that anticipatory grief because we have a name for everything.
Yes.
But yeah, with codependency, I think with the definition, a theme that I've noticed on the podcast, especially talking about parenting, is how, yeah, I think technically, like we could pathologize moms and dads and by saying, oh, they're codependent with their child. But yeah, isn't aspects of or characteristics of codependency are inherent in parenting. And so, yeah, so I think I appreciate how you're differentiating between healthy and yeah, it really can be unhealthy when, yeah, I think that's when we actually do, we would describe a parent as codependent, but then there's just like, yeah, there's just inherent pieces of being a parent where you do sacrifice and you do put the needs of another above your own, but
Yeah.
in a healthy, sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think talking about it in terms of parenting is a brilliant example of the necessity, really, I mean, of having a healthy codependency, because simultaneously you are caretaking for these little beings, right? They don't know what their needs are yet. They don't have an ability to express themselves in the way we do as adults. They don't have an ability to regulate their own emotions or have any kind of language for them. And so, as a parent, you have to anticipate and be able to label and help them figure out how to do that for themselves, simultaneously doing it for them. And that
Right.
is a very difficult task. And that's like the art of parenting, is figuring out how to do that.
Right.
And when what you're doing um, may be harmful, but I don't think that it's not easy, because you cannot anticipate with one child, or if you have multiple children in a family system who are all going to be very different in their response to you in relationship and in the world. It's really hard to navigate that. And I think parents, that is an example of a very healthy codependency to a certain point.
Right.
Or you absolutely wouldn't tell an infant, you know, sorry, I have some needs now. You need to stop crying and walk out of the room. I mean, I think at some point it's okay to say to a parent who's overwhelmed, hey, you have needs here too. And helping them find a balance in that.
Right.
It's such a difficult job to parent.
Yeah.
And
Shout out
there's
to all the parents.
yeah, self-disclosure, I don't have little human beings running around. I didn't raise them. I chose not to have kids. And I knew from a younger age that it was just a huge responsibility, and not one that is to be taken lightly. And I didn't want it. Like, wow, that's a lot of responsibility. And, I'm okay with that decision today. I admire people who enter into that relationship and really commit to doing the best job they can do. And
Yeah.
the truth to all the parents listening to this is, you can do the best job in the world, and there's no guarantee of an outcome. And the best job with your first child is not going to be the same best job for the next one. And you have to be creative and figure that out and navigate through that relationship with them. And that is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
I have so much empathy for their experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, next question. Last time you were on, we talked at length, in depth about this, microseconds of interaction at Aldi with the 25-cent cart. Do I put it away or do I let this lady take it and not pay 25 cents? And which was a great example. So I'm curious, another experience or relationship from codependent experience or relationship from your own life that you can share with us.
Yeah, that was I'm pondering on that again as you remind me of that moment was so profound for me, and it's a little bit less weighted today. I have the distance on it to look at that incident, which was, I don't even know how long ago at this point, well over a year ago, where I just can laugh at that part of myself a little bit more that really struggled. And I just operated from that place so much. And I think maybe since I know kind of the topic of where we're going today, it might be most beneficial to give an example as someone who is a therapist in a business that she owns and operates.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm my own CEO, I'm my own
Right.
COO, I'm my own CFO. And I'm also the person who's delivering the service and on the front lines with people who are coming to us because they want assistance in some way, right? They're wanting something from us and they're coming to this relationship where that want is often really laden with so much emotional baggage, right? So much need. And we are in such a interesting role when we own our own businesses to balance. It's very similar to parenting in some ways, I think, being a not experienced parent, where I have noticed and have recognized that, and it came up recently, it comes up all the time, right? When people who they're coming and paying us for this service that we're providing and to help them with changing something or changing aspects of their life, and they might have needs in this relationship, right? So how do I navigate through holding very clear boundaries for my business and be able to be fluid as a human with humans when I really do care about what they're bringing to me and putting on the table.
Right.
And, still, I have to be aware of these things, and it's not always easy to make a decision when your heart's involved. And so, one of the most recent struggles that I had, and I really had to think about it, and this is the shift from that Aldi experience, is I recognize this tendency and I understand it enough, and I've seen how it manifests in the relationships I have and what the emotions and the drive underneath all of this is. It makes it easier to be clear about the decisions I'm making. And also then when I want to shift things.
Right.
So I think the example I want to give you is really about a choice that I made that is an example of, and this might not be fitting your question, so you can redirect me if this is wrong, but healthy codependency, right? Where I'm going to sacrifice my need for somebody. I'm working with a particular person who had a huge natural disaster that affected their livelihood and their home.
Wow.
Right after I made a decision in my business to raise my fee. So I raised my fee. We had a very brief interaction about it and put it on the side to address at a follow-up session. And in between that moment and the follow-up session, this natural disaster happened. And oh my gosh, the empathy that I felt and fear, like imagining myself in that place, what that would be like to just lose everything. And I really had to think hard about it because I knew from our electronic correspondences that raising that fee at that time was going to be a significant burden, if not impossibility, for this person that I've had a relationship with for several years.
Right.
And let's complicate it. A relationship with another female who is in business for herself, right? So that part of me got very activated because I can relate so much to what her experiences are. And so there's what we're going to talk about later today about this difficulty I have at times that I think we all do, which is where the awareness comes in, of having a clear boundary between where I end and they begin.
Right.
Right? The healthy codependence here is, yeah, I have a need. I raised my fee. That's right now the goal of my business is to make this amount of money. So, and that goal helps me do other things in my life, right? That's what a resource is. I made the decision for the time being, for a period of time, where I am going to put that need aside of mine to extend an offer to her so that she can continue to get the assistance she needs in the relationship we have and move forward from this.
Right.
Now, some business people might say to me that I sacrificed my own need, and I should never do that in business, that your fee is your fee, what it costs, your service has value. Yes, yes, and yes. I agree with all of that. But this is one of those times when, with this awareness and ability to kind of slow down a little bit and not immediately jump into that panic place that I think we all go when we are people pleasing, when we're self-sacrificers, when we just want to make the other person happy or their life easier or whatever it is that the goal is that we're underneath the behavior. One of those times when that didn't occur, but I was able to think through it and make that decision from a place that I feel good about, as opposed to the Aldi experience, which was I acted so fast on giving that 25 cents over, right? And then I felt guilty and shame and bad. And I felt like, oh, I sold part of my soul in that. And this interaction was so different.
Right.
Could it be labeled as codependent? But I'm choosing to do it.
Right.
I want to do it. And because I'm able to hold boundaries in the business structure in other areas, I can do it. So it gives me the ability to have space to give somebody else something in a time of need.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
Codependency boundary setting is not black and white. We like to talk about it like it is. It is not. Ever. And, I'm just excited to share that story because that story wouldn't have been reality a couple of years ago for me. Like I wouldn't have been able to do that from a place that is more whole,
Right.
and less fragmented. So I hope that makes the listeners feel maybe a little bit inspired. Like you're not totally hopeless if you're struggling with some of these dynamics in your relationships. They can shift. You
Mm-hmm.
can feel good about them.
Right. And I do appreciate this emphasis on your awareness and understanding of what happened with the Aldi cart helps inform you and provides clarity with making decisions or navigating interactions in the future. So, right, it's very important for us codependents, even when we do find ourselves, I call it like a codependent dilemma. It could be really quick, or it could be an email saying, let me know your decision in a month, right? You might have all this time to work through and find clarity. Or yeah, someone might be asking for a cart. But it's so helpful. It's paramount to really reflect on past experiences, learn, yeah, what was going on underneath that to help inform your decision, ongoing. I really, really appreciate your emphasis on that. Yeah.
That was an amazing 25-cent lesson that's still giving to me today.
Right.
Right. And at the time, I didn't feel that way at all, but I love therapists like to get accused of analyzing or overanalyzing everything. And yeah, we like to do that, but I think it can serve a purpose. Um, and those moments are also really good markers too for us to not just continue to learn from, but also as a measurement of growth. Because when we talk about codependency, we talk about a lot of things that are very intangible, right? You can
Right.
see the action, how it manifests, but what's underneath it is what's important, right? It has nothing to do with the actual behavior so much as what is going on underneath that's driving that. And so those things that drive codependency, there is no measurement for them, right? And so I think that those things for ourselves as human beings, but also as therapists to help our clients with being able to have measurements where they can look back and go, hey, wow, look at that space I was in. And that wasn't even that long ago. And I'm 50 years old. I'm still growing. I'm still learning. I'm still healing. I'm still changing.
Yeah.
Not too late ever. And I hope I can say this at 60 and 70. I plan to say this, something similar, that I'm growing and changing and learning and healing. And look where I am. And I just think those are beautiful moments to really take in and acknowledge, and to be kind to yourself in that, because this is hard, learning to be healthy when we were, most of us, taught from a very wounded caregiving experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was the shame and the beat up job I did for a little bit with that 25-cent cart incident, and now I'm very grateful for it. Because it's still teaching me.
Right.
It's still
That's
teaching me.
the power of those experiences, right? For the listener. Yeah, you might feel ashamed, you might feel embarrassed, guilt, regret, remorse. And also, yeah, this is not your destiny. Like, you're not doomed to have that experience over and over, with awareness and understanding. Yeah.
I think you just hit on something really important that I imagine will come out later today as well, is what happens on those dynamics of the codependency that are going on for each individual, is that victim, that we can be operating in from this place of poor me, or this is how it always has been, this is how it's always going to be, and it's okay to feel that. Those feelings are valid. And yes, we all at some point have been victims. And we all have choices to make, right? It's scary, it's hard, it's new, it's unknown, but it's possible. Little shifts at a time.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's shift to our focus today. So we're going to talk about codependent CEOs, Chief Executive Officers. Which, yeah, we corresponded prior to this, and the CEO of a big corporation or big corporations, they're not the faces who I picture when I think codependent. So, what does codependency look like in a CEO?
Mhm. I love that you started that way because a codependent leader is such an oxymoron, right? Not at
Yeah.
all what we think of. But I also believe that much of our leadership going on, oh gosh, we can look at political offices where that leadership is very codependent, but in how businesses are being run. And I'm sure that if anybody here listening today, or Marissa, you have even probably worked for other people where you've experienced codependent leadership. It's rampant.
Hmm.
I have done a little bit of reading here and there, and I've read, there was one writer who said they believe it's an epidemic in corporate
Wow.
culture.
Wow.
And when I started really diving into working with this group and working with people who are in positions of power and leadership, I have noticed that it is a consistent dynamic, right, of how they're showing up in their leadership roles. And so it's hard to give a definition of what it means to be a codependent leader or a codependent CEO because it's more of a description, right, of a bunch of things. Just like a codependent relationship of any kind, it's so difficult to describe. So I thought we would talk about maybe um, why this is going on, and then
Hmm.
go into maybe some of the traits,
Okay.
because the definition really isn't too different than if we're talking about between mother and son or husband and wife. It's just on a much larger scale, right? Because we're not talking about two individuals anymore or a small family unit. We're talking about companies that are teams of, I don't know how many people could be on a team. I guess whatever number, right? You can come up
Right.
with um, where this goes on. But the underpinnings of what we've already talked about, and probably so many of your guests have talked about on this show, are all very similar. So it's a codependent CDO is CEO. Said that twice today. CEO is someone who sacrifices their own needs for the needs of the company.
Right.
And that looks different for every one of them. But we'll talk about some why has this happened, why it happens, and also just look at some of those traits. So, um, the complicated thing about codependent CEOs is it often goes undetected. So that's why it's become so rampant, and why I believe one writer had labeled it as an epidemic. And in a couple of moments, I'll explain why it's gone so undetected, but it is very, very undetectable because it hides or masks in a lot of company values.
Hmm.
And so on the surface, codependency on a team or in a company looks like teamwork, looks like employee engagement. That's one of my favorites, employee engagement. It also looks like customer service. And so it's not the values in and of themselves that are the problem at all, right? I don't think anybody would disagree that customer service isn't an important value.
Right.
Like, it's extremely important. Employee engagement, super important. Um, that isn't the issue. The issue is, again, what we already mentioned is that what's going on underneath that is the problem, or where these leaders are getting very stuck. And, before I go on, I want to say, I don't think most CEOs start out with bad intentions. I think all of this stems from really actually being very well intended and wanting to do a good job. The approach is off. So the next thing that leads me to bring up is what I've already mentioned, which was leadership has a tendency in corporations to focus on what's measurable and tangible, right? So leadership is measured by statistics. It's measured by, there's metrics they use, strategy, things that you can like literally label, write down, measure, analyze, and come up with a solution to fix. Super important, right? But those things in and of themselves don't make a business run well or be successful, right? What actually kind of drives the business, so to speak, is what's underneath it that drives the codependency. So emotions, right? Values, belief systems of each person, right? Those are the things that drive the tangible. The intangible feeds what can become tangible, and in a business equate with wealth, success, and just having a successful business. So it's really hard to measure these intangible things. And so what leaders have a tendency to hold on to is the stuff that can be measured. Like, look how well we're doing here. Look how well we're doing here. And then that's the stuff they can control or attempt to control.
Right.
And that falls directly into the next thing, which is, why is this going on? Because leaders, codependent leaders, need and feel a pressure to put on a facade. Right. So they look like they're doing well. They look like they can handle and manage everything. And that they stuff insecurities, they stuff fear, they stuff anxiety. Business is filled with anxiety, right? There's so much we can't control when you're running a business. And those insecurities and fears, if left unchecked and just stuffed down, they control you instead of you controlling them.
Right.
So that's sort of the why. I'll hit the pause button before I shift gears into looking at the traits, because I can see you're thinking over there.
Well, no, it's just interesting. I've watched some, I watch content and I analyze it with my psychotherapist eyes. And two things come to mind. So first, I recently watched, I've read a lot, and I don't know, I just like learning about the opioid crisis. And I've watched like all the shows on it. And there's a Netflix series on the Sackler family at Purdue Pharma. And, kind of like the second generation, really like a nephew took over, like his uncle was really the head honcho. And like, yeah, he's obsessed. He's obsessed. He's getting divorced. He's skipping vacations. They just made $1 billion yesterday, and he can't stop. He really can't stop. So yeah, I mean, really putting the needs of the company above his own. And then I remember watching, I think it was a documentary on, oh gosh, now I can't remember his name. Some financial guru. Yeah, billionaire. And like there's pictures of him and his family when his kids are little, and he just always had a newspaper. He always had a newspaper. Christmas, Thanksgiving, maybe even at their school performances if he went, right? Because it was just all about the company. Right. So just, I guess what stands out to me is how other areas in their life are neglected, which is the same thing for a typical codependent, right? We're so focused on our relationship, our friendships, our other familial relationships just go to the wayside. So it's interesting. Yeah. I wasn't watching it and being like, wow, this Sackler CEO is really codependent. But
That's another thing we have in common. I watched all that stuff too, and I could watch more. I enjoy it. I'm fascinated by it. It's really interesting. It teaches me something, and it also just makes me go, how does nobody see this? Right? But from an outside perspective, it's a little easier. Was that the painkiller?
mhm,
Painkiller or the other one with yeah, that was a good one. Did you watch the one with Michael Keaton?
mhm,
Yeah. So very different perceptions of the same story. Right. And
mhm.
how that was great. So yeah, to the detriment, even his own mental health. Like this dude seemed to, from that portrayal in that miniseries, really start to lose his marbles. And he was talking to the father or the grandfather,
Right.
that he was there, and he wouldn't hear anything else. It was almost like he was having visual and auditory hallucinations. Yeah, it was very interesting, and it's also interesting that he 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 right, all these male, and that's a difference in often with CEOs in business. Um, there's some little nuanced differences there with women and men, but men have this role in society, right?
Right.
It's a status thing, to be successful in business. They are the breadwinners. That's their role, is to go out and get the meat and, come home, and they keep us alive. So they have a lot of at stake, right? It's a lot of their self-image and their self-worth gets derived from what they do and work.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a great example of it will destroy. So this isn't just toxic. This isn't just like, oh, unhealthy. It's not going to be good for you. No, this will lead to destruction.
Mhm.
Um, Hypertension, stress, heart attack, stroke, cancer, autoimmune disorders, depression, anxiety, you name it. Right. So it's
Mhm.
very bad for our systems to be operating from that place at total sacrifice to ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good observation of that.
Mhm.
All for I mean, it was a lot of money, so much money though that I don't even know if they enjoyed it too, right?
I don't
They
think he
didn't go
took a
anywhere,
day off. Yeah. Yeah, he didn't take a day off.
you know. So why?
Right.
I wonder,
Why?
right?
Right? Looking at underneath.
As we always do,
Mhm.
tearing
What if
everything apart because it's so fun.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about that underneath stuff. What drives this? Like, how, what feeds this codependency in CEOs that's so powerful? And the first thing is, I'll start with self-esteem. Like they have a low, in general, they have a very low self-esteem about themselves, and their worth is derived from others, right? Or from success in the company. If the company is successful, if the team does well, if we meet that deadline, if that project rolls out on time, oh, look at me. I did it. I'm good. Right? And so that's that external motivation that they really need from like the people who are working for them, from the success of the company, that is underneath some of this codependency.
Mhm.
Um, Now, let's jump back for just a moment about how values of company mask some of this stuff, right? So it's very easy to hide codependency when you're in a position of a CEO. Um, so how does self-esteem get masked? Gets masked in uh, servitude, selfishness, selfless leadership. Look how dedicated I am.
Right.
Look how hard I work. I don't even go home. I don't take a day off. I don't need that. I get in early, I stay late. I don't take lunch. And when you don't take lunch or you don't take breaks or you don't take time or you sit there and hold your urine for hours and hours because you don't want to interrupt the meeting, that's such a sacrifice of self.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a depravity of basic needs.
Right.
And that's so very harmful. But look what it does for a CEO. Look how wonderful I am as your leader. Second thing, maybe I do have a little list in front of me, so I might jump around a little bit, but just as some bullet points. The need for power and control. People in a position of a CEO often have a need to feel like they're in control. It helps them feel secure, right?
Right.
Somebody with a low self-esteem, somebody who has anxious attachment, somebody who's afraid, they need to feel secure. And having a powerful position where you're a leader and you're in charge and you're making shit happen, that gives them a false sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
That's the need that gets met. Underneath it, so what are the values that they get masked over that are, oh, look how disciplined he is. Oh, there's so much order on that team. Right? Look how successful he is at rolling out deadlines on time. The next thing is like they're often people pleasing. They don't say no.
Right.
And that can be to their employees themselves. It could be to people above them. So like, let's say, well, the CEO is the top of the ladder, right? But they don't say no.
The shareholders. The shareholders are always like, get me out of jail free card. The shareholders. What about the shareholders or the board? What's the board gonna say? Who's on the board?
Right?
Yeah.
And then have you seen the series? I'm sure many of your listeners have seen Succession. They're always talking about like their perception to the shareholders. What's going to make these people happy? Well, let's keep them happy until we drop the ball, right? And there's a lot of people pleasing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Very two-faced, very disingenuine. Yeah, the shareholders. How much percent do they have? Well, we got to keep them happy. They've got 41%. We need their vote. If we lose their vote, we lose this. So much strategizing, right? That's where the strategy and the metrics come in.
Right.
The mask again, right? And in that inability to say no, they have a lot of boundary issues. Oh yeah. What does that mask? What masks the? Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. What masks the people pleasing is customer service. Customer's always right. Employee engagement is another mask for that. So next one, boundaries. We talked a little bit before. I think I mentioned the term enmeshment, right? So the boundaries of where the CEO begins and ends is not with just the problem or the goal or the outcome. It extends far beyond that. Where there's almost like a non-existent boundary and their employees. So a CEO who, how everybody's working under the CEO, is they don't care about the goal. They care about that person's happiness. They care about, their situation at home. Well, I can't get rid of them. They're not really doing their job, but they've got 4 kids and their wife's pregnant or whatever, their wife is sick. I can't reprimand him because I don't want to let him go. I don't want to let him go. So then what happens is they extend a lot of grace to those people at the expense of other employees, which creates a huge dynamic issue. But then, what sometimes happens is they take on more than what they should. So rather than delegating and holding people accountable to the job you hired them for, you end up taking on that responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
which feeds their self-esteem. Right? Look at me. Look all I can do. I can handle everything. I'm coming in at 2 in the morning tomorrow. I'm not going to go home. I've had people who are very, CEOs or high up in companies who've said, yeah, I slept under my desk. One gal who wasn't even a CEO, that just when they're rolling out and they have a deadline, she can barely function. She's so tired, not eating. Will come to session and go right back to work at 8 o'clock at night and just work like 18, 20-hour days. And this is a woman who has a 3-year-old child
Mm-hmm.
and not a CEO and ultimate sacrificer.
Right.
And that comes from a lot of fear. But yeah, so, and what does this do for that person is it gives them a sense of being in control, right? They also have, a lot of issues with like excessive negative thoughts, and as we've already addressed, a lack of self-esteem. And what does this mask, right? So in a company, what masks, sorry, I'm saying that wrong every time, but what masks that is, here at this company, we have a sense of family, right? I've heard that so many times.
Mm-hmm.
There's a value of trust. We trust our employees. We trust what we're doing. And that masks those lack of boundaries, right? That value, the measurable metric.
Right.
The other thing that often people who are CEOs who are codependent are very reactive. They have a very difficult time managing their emotions. They take things very personally. They'll become very defensive in their interactions. So if somebody underneath them challenges what they're doing, that threatens their sense of control, that threatens their self-esteem, it threatens how they're operating in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll be very reactive rather than being able to sit back and really listen and engage and consider that maybe what's happening here is not healthy.
Right.
These are just in this mode of like having to behave this way to fill all of these emotional needs.
Yeah.
I remember I had a boss who would stand behind me. This is when I worked in a hospital, and she was the director of the department, and she had it out for me for a while. I took a lot of shit from her, and I felt horrible in that position. I was so anxious and stressed out because she would literally sneak up on a medical unit and stand behind you and listen and watch. And she'd try to catch you doing something that like she didn't like or whatever she was looking for. God forbid you're 5 minutes late. And it was almost like, it was a very weird sense that I had of her, that she was lurking around the corners all the time. I felt like she just came out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And now that makes sense to me. Like, she was a very codependent leader.
Right.
Very anxiously attached, had a lot of her needs getting met in that role.
Right.
And boy, did she feel like she was in control. Ooh, she wrote me up for being late. Ooh, she's watching me like a hawk, she would say. I'll never forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Very demeaning, demoralizing, and I felt extremely scared of her because that was my livelihood and I can't get fired. That's my health insurance. What would I do? And me being codependent, wanted to please her. I wanted her to like me. I wanted to be good enough.
Right.
So yeah, it just made me think of that situation, which would have been a good example. The next thing that I was thinking about of these traits that we've also already touched on is what, I kind of call caretaking instead of like caring about or caring for.
Mm-hmm.
And caretaking is, literally when you start taking over, like a CEO, I kind of already also touched on this, will do more than what's their job.
Right.
Or a leader of a team will do what's more than their own job to do, because if that person underneath them doesn't do their own job and pull their own weight, what happens to the project? What happens to the group? What is the perception then to the customer or the client that we're supposed to be delivering to? But it threatens so much. So that's where many of these things overlap, of a lack of boundaries. That it's not caring for the company or caring for the team. It's literally taking care of it
Yeah.
at the detriment to themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the values that kind of mask that are, I'm concerned for this employee, but I'm concerned they have so much on their plate. We care about the welfare of our employees. So that's where that value gets kind of masked over caretaking in
Right.
a healthy way. I think the last thing that I kind of identified for today's purposes is codependent CEOs are extremely conflict avoidant. So they are difficult to approach. Why does this happen? It's often caused by what we've already talked about: low self-esteem, and also kind of a general belief that there's something bad about conflict, or that it's going to cause pain. That's where you see kind of that overlap of caretaking. The other comes in. So codependent CEOs don't address issues that need to be addressed, because that conflict instills so much anxiety in
Right.
them. So let's just avoid it. And some of the company values that mask that are, I like this one: harmonious.
Right. Cohesion.
Right? Employee engagement.
Right.
All measurable. All measurable. You can measurable how engaged employees are. Send out the survey. We can have results. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's probably some other traits that I haven't thought of in terms of like what are commonalities with codependent CEOs. But those are the ones I came up with for today. Probably enough for your lovely listeners.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And as you're going through them, they're just like you're just describing me and my codependency, right? Low self-esteem. I wanted power and control, right? That's what I am seeking. I have horrible boundaries. I am people pleasing, but yeah, I just appreciate like how we're looking at it through a lens of codependency, yeah, within like CEOs and leadership.
Yeah, one of the things too, I don't think I touched on yet, Marissa, is codependency in the workplace for anybody, CEO or not, isn't just going on in the workplace. This is a way of operating in the world that is learned from their family of origin and is often still being carried out in all of their relationships.
Right.
I hear that in the work I do with couples, where I tell him to do this. I've told him 27 times. He will never do it. So I just have to do it for him. It just comes out all the time. She nags. Doesn't she see how important my job is? I don't have time to spend with the kids. I speak from very traditional mindsets, but it goes on everywhere in that person's life. It is the field of them in their environment of how they're operating. And the benefit for people in positions of leadership to work on their codependency tendencies and to be aware of them, because there are going to be some times when maybe they want to help that employee who's struggling. There might be some times when they do choose to work late or come in early or help out on a project. But they can do it from a place of mindfulness,
Right.
right? And be aware of what's happening. And since all of our emotions drive the bus of what the success of this company is going to be or not be, it's really important to know how to maneuver this vehicle
Right.
and how to put gas in it correctly. Like you certainly don't want to go and put water in the gas tank. The bus won't go very far.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's important for people to know this about themselves and how they're showing up as leaders, because that your company's success or the company's success is dependent on it.
Right.
Um, for your growth, profit, for healthy leadership. I found a quote earlier today that I jotted down
Mm-hmm.
that I came across, and I'm like, oh, isn't this interesting that I read this today? The musician Ed Sheeran said somewhere, um, that he was quoted saying this: I can't tell you the key to success, but the key to failure is trying to please everyone. And I just really appreciated um, someone who's very successful and well known, and that he recognizes, probably in himself without saying it, right?
Right.
This is the key to
Mm-hmm.
failure.
Yeah. All right. Do you have time for one more question? I'm looking at the clock.
Got all the time in the world for you.
All
I love
right.
talking to
Well,
you. You're freaking great.
if a CEO or leader is listening and they are resonating with these traits and ways that they have masked their own codependency at work, yeah, you talked about how important it is to be aware of this, right? And come from a place from mindfulness and intention. Where do you start? Where do you start with these CEOs that are your clients?
Great question. Not the easiest answer to give you, because do most people who show up in my office know that this is the problem? Almost nobody. I work with doctors, lawyers, CEOs, people in a position of leadership who I can't remember when anyone said, I'm struggling with codependency. I really don't know if I've ever heard somebody be that direct about it. So when they show up, they might not even be aware that this is what's going on.
Right.
Often how they present is very anxious. I need stress management. They are having high conflict in their relationships. They most CEOs aren't clinically depressed to the point that where they're debilitated in bed, right? But their depression manifests in different ways. So it comes out like they're really frustrated. They don't have much enjoyment outside of work. They're angry. They're lashing out. They don't know why. They dread going into work. They don't like their employees. But they don't come in recognizing what's actually going on underneath it. And very few of them will label it codependency. I think likely because there's a lack of education, but a huge stigma and a negative connotation around that word.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the work I do when I start, of course, is you have to meet a client where they're at. And this is the art. This is the art of the therapist.
Right.
Shifting from that content of what they're telling you the problem is to their lived experience, of what they're feeling. What's happening
Right.
as you're telling me about this? Bringing out, It's difficult to explain the art of a therapist because there's things that I'll hear, words that they'll use. I have to. Well, tell me more about that have to. Sometimes I ask them to put a version of themselves like they're the person who doesn't want to go to work anymore, who just dreads it. Can you put that part of you in the chair across the room and tell me just what do you feel seeing that person there? And that brings up all kinds of experiences. But an example is, I feel bad for him. I feel bad for him. He's just stuck.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know what to do. He feels like he's failing at home. He feels like he's failing at work. And so finding ways to give voice to some of the things underneath it that have been feeding the behavior.
Right.
So finding a way for them to connect to feeling shame. Men don't like to call shame shame. Right? So helping them come to part of it is education, right? What I'm hearing, hey, you know what I'm hearing? It really sounds to me like you're feeling shame at home. And explaining what I mean by that. And if I can explain it in a way that makes sense to them without re-shaming them,
right,
then you can start to work on, I wonder if there's a way that might not be true. So trying to challenge some of these beliefs that are feeding it, looking at the story they learned from childhood. So many people who I would describe as codependent have extremely difficult, if not traumatic, childhoods where their caregivers were absolutely not present. And going back and doing some of the work with that younger part of themselves that got stifled and stuffed and ignored because they had to, right? In the service of survival, they had to get through that. So finding ways to help them recognize that this is a learned pattern, that there's nothing to judge about it. It really came out of survival and the best intentions. It's just become unhealthy. And let's get you back to a healthier place. A lot of parts work. I have a kind of an integrated approach, even though I'm a Gestalt therapist. I do it. Sometimes it's more of a strengths-based perspective that I work from because people who come to me at this point, CEOs entering into therapy, that in and of itself is very difficult to admit that like I'm in this place. So they come in and they're quite shattered, and they need to be really supported, and have somebody believe in them that they're not a lost cause and they haven't just destroyed everything and there's no hope left. Right. So various therapeutic approaches come out depending on where they are in their process and what our relationship is. It takes a long time to build trust with people and to get them to be able to connect with emotions in front of you or reveal parts of their stories that might be very filled with shame. It's work, and there's a good return on it. Right. I think the investment of therapy with a therapist who's a good match for you is an investment that will give you back for the rest of your life. Exponential return rate. Right. And that return rate will affect everybody on your team, at your company, that you lead, and at your home. And in all of your relationships, even at the grocery store at Aldi. With the stranger.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much for coming back and really educating and illuminating for us codependents and CEOs. You're preaching to the choir now. I'm like, oh yeah, they are codependent. So if people are curious about working with you, learning more about you, where can they go?
First, I want to thank you for having me on again. I have been on several podcasts now, but at this point in time, and um, without singling anybody else out or saying they're not as good, I just really enjoy our connection and your relatability. You make it very easy to be open with because you're so open about you. And that's healing for me and appreciate it greatly. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I know your listeners appreciate you too. So
Yeah.
you give a gift to many people by this work you're doing on the podcast and your practice. How can you reach me? I have a website. It is my full name, Melissa Bennett-Heinz, all one word.com.
Okay.
And yeah, please feel free to check it out. You can see a little bit about me, my practice, where I come from, what I do, and visit, and you can leave. You don't have to stick around, or you can reach me. There's a contact form on there if you so desire.
Awesome. Okay, I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Okay.
And again, thank you. And thank you, dear listener. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week. Take care. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy, and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.